Hi everyone, it's Trista, and I'm here to chat with you today a little bit more about the continuum between directive and non-directive tutoring, and to show you why when you are tutoring, you really want to move fluidly between both, operating within a flexible middle space that is responsive to the student's learning needs. So let's discuss what we're talking about when we're talking about flexibility, with apologies to Raymond Carver for riffing off his work. But if you know his short story, you get it. And if you don't, well, maybe consider reading it. Although we're not all together having a conversation right now, I do want you to hold these warm-up questions in your mind for a moment. Think about why the ideal session is a conversation, but then think about why that can be a challenge during some of your sessions. It's my hope that throughout the course of this video, you will start to see why, despite the challenges, conversation should always be what we're striving towards during our tutoring sessions. So, what pulls us toward a prescriptive response when tutoring a student? First, let's consider the pressure that students often feel, that we end up feeling too. When they come to us, they may be anxious about their performance, especially if a deadline is looming. This urgency can lead us to provide quick solutions rather than taking a step back to encourage deeper understanding. Additionally, there's our inherent desire for the student to do well. We want to see them succeed, and sometimes this desire can push us to take on the responsibility of their work. While our intentions are good, this can hinder their ability to learn independently. Finally, many tutors find themselves in situations where they simply don't know how else to help. In the moment, providing a prescriptive answer feels like the easiest path forward. However, we need to reflect on whether this approach truly serves the students in the long run. Let's keep these points in mind as we explore the dynamics of tutoring and how we can better support our students throughout their learning journey. So why is it that being prescriptive is not always the best place to be all the time? First, one major drawback of giving prescriptive answers is the lack of engagement it fosters. Nobody likes to be sitting in a session where the student is completely disengaged. But when we provide solutions without encouraging discussion or exploration, we risk making the learning experience passive for the student. Moreover, being overly prescriptive leaves no room for building the student's confidence. If the student relies solely on our answers, they may struggle to develop their own problem-solving skills or belief in their abilities. And another important point is that premature advice can inadvertently cut the student out of the equation. When we jump in too quickly with solutions, we might not allow them the space to think, to be critical, and to arrive at their own conclusions. You got to remember, sometimes it takes someone a little bit longer than it might take you to get there, or they might lack the confidence to say what they're thinking. So we got to give them that space and that time. Lastly, this approach of being prescriptive often leads to dictation rather than support. Instead of fostering a collaborative learning environment, we risk turning the tutoring session into a one-sided lecture, where the student feels more like a passive listener than an active participant. As we reflect on these potential pitfalls here, let's think about how we can promote a more interactive and empowering learning experience for the students that come in to see us at the Writing Center. Now, I want to make the argument that what we really want to be focusing on is the writer too, not just the writing. And when we're being prescriptive, we aren't really doing that. But let me back up for a second, because what does that even mean? Essentially, what I'm referring to is empowering students to take charge of their own learning process. Instead of simply providing answers, we guide them to navigate challenges independently, fostering a sense of ownership and responsibility. But what does that look like in practice? Well, it can involve asking open-ended questions, encouraging them to articulate their thoughts, or helping them brainstorm strategies for problem solving. This approach not only engages students, but also allows them to explore different perspectives and solutions themselves. Now, is there truth to this idea of student agency? Of course. Research shows that when students are active participants in their learning, they tend to retain information better and develop critical thinking skills. Empowering them to steer their own ship in this way leads to deeper understanding and long-term success, which are the goals. So, who's the captain of the ship? Ideally, this navigation is a partnership. While the students should take the lead, the tutor serves as a supportive guide, someone who helps navigate rough waters but allows the students to set their own course. As we continue throughout this video here, let's consider how we can effectively adopt this model in our tutoring sessions so that we can enhance engagement and therefore growth. Okay, I know what you're thinking. How the heck am I supposed to figure out where I'm supposed to be on the continuum, Trista? Well, let's talk about it a little bit here. How do you determine whether you need to be directive or non-directive in your approach? This largely depends on the student's needs and the context of the session. You kind of got to be able to think quickly on your feet. You have to learn how to pivot, right? You have to assess their confidence level, their prior knowledge, the nature of the material. All of this can help you guide your decision as to where you need to be. And you might move around during an appointment too. Start one place, end up another. But here's a general kind of rule of thumb. When you're focusing on ideas, a more conversational and Socratic approach is beneficial. This method encourages dialogue, allowing students to explore concepts and articulate their understanding. By asking probing questions, you can help them think critically and develop their own insights. On the other hand, when focusing on process, it's an ideal time for modeling. Here you might provide resources, tools, or strategies that the students can take away and apply in future situations. In those moments, a directive approach helps students learn specific skills while still giving them the space to practice and grow. Ultimately, finding the right balance on the continuum is always going to be key in your sessions. But by adapting an approach of flexibility based on the situation in front of you, you can effectively support students' learning journeys while still working towards that ultimate goal of a little bit more independence, because you can't always be with them all the time. As we transition to our next section, let's consider a crucial couple of questions. How can we even get the students talking during our sessions? How do we engage them in their own learning process? Remember, sometimes they come in because they were told to, not because they had this burning desire to come get tutoring. But engagement really is the key to effective tutoring, and there are several strategies that we can employ to encourage students to participate actively. So first, we're going to discuss the importance of listening actively. This means truly tuning into what the student is saying, validating their thoughts and feelings, and creating an environment where they feel comfortable sharing. Next, we'll explore how to ask questions, specifically prompting, clarifying, and probing questions. These techniques can stimulate deeper thinking and help students articulate their ideas more clearly. We're also going to look at the concept of responding as a reader. This involves engaging with the student's ideas as if you were interpreting a text, which can foster a more collaborative dialogue. Finally, we'll consider the practice of sharing out, where you engage in a dialogue with students that involves your own learning processes, where you can share and engage the student in that way. So we're going to look a little bit more deeply into each of these strategies and discover how they can enhance our sessions. Now, we're going to discuss why active listening matters in tutoring. First and foremost, great tutors are great listeners. Not talkers, listeners. By honing our active listening skills, we not only enhance our ability to understand our students' needs, but our overall effectiveness as tutors greatly increases, because this skill allows us to pick up on nuances in the communication of the students and then respond appropriately. Secondly, having a conversation with students creates a rich exchange of ideas, and that's really where tutoring is at its most magical. Writing is often described as thinking on the page, and our role is to help students think more deeply about their work. We're not just delivering answers in the Writing Center. We are conduits for thought. This means we facilitate discussions and encourage exploration rather than simply directing a flow of information. By practicing active listening, we empower the students to articulate their own thoughts and engage in meaningful dialogue. This not only builds their confidence, but also fosters a deeper understanding of the subject matter. That's what makes learning amazing. So let's explore some specific techniques for active listening that can help us become more effective tutors. What are some components of active listening? Let's take a closer look. First, we have paying attention. This is foundational for active listening. To truly pay attention, we need to eliminate distractions, put things away on our table, make eye contact with the students, or look into the camera if you're on Zoom, nod, give other sort of body language indications that show you're engaged and interested in what they're talking about, right? This shows the student that you see their thoughts and ideas as important and that you're fully present and hearing them out. Next, we want to work on withholding judgment. It's crucial to approach each conversation with each student with an open mind. It's their paper, it's their ideas, right? So we want to practice active neutrality by refraining from forming opinions while the student is speaking. We just want to kind of stay open and receive, right? So instead of trying to figure out what you think about the topic, really just receive their perspective on the topic or the subject. You might say things like, I appreciate your viewpoint. Let's explore it a little further. Or, tell me more, which encourages them to express themselves without fear of criticism. Next, we have reflecting, which involves restatements or paraphrases of what the student has said to show that you're understanding what they're explaining or what their perspective is. If a student expresses frustration about a concept, you could respond with something like, it sounds like you're feeling like this topic is challenging. This will validate their feelings and also encourage deeper exploration of their ideas. Then we've got clarifying. Sometimes students may express their thoughts in ways that are unclear, right? That happens. So what you want to do is you want to use open-ended questions like, can you tell me a little more about that? Or what do you mean when you say blank? To encourage them to elaborate further or to re-explain in a different way. This helps to ensure that you actually fully understand their message, which aids in guiding the discussion effectively rather than kind of taking over the discussion. Next, we have summarizing. So we want to periodically summarize what the student has shared to reinforce understanding, but it also helps to keep the conversation on track. So you just say things like, so you're saying that blank, or let me recap what we just talked about and then give a quick summation. This consolidates their thoughts and it gives them an opportunity to clarify or correct anything that might have been misunderstood. Then we have sharing, right? Notice it's kind of down towards the bottom, but you do get that to that place where you want to share your own insights or relevant experiences in order to enrich the conversation. But you want to be mindful of keeping the focus on the student. You might say, I once worked with a student who faced a similar challenge and here's what helped them. Or I wrote a paper on a similar topic and this is how I approached it. But you always kind of want to pivot back to how this relates to their experience, their learning, their work, and let them take back over. And then we have empathizing. Showing empathy is essential to building rapport with students. Using empathetic statements like, I can see why you might feel that way, acknowledges the student's feelings, which can help foster trust and make it easier for them to engage openly in the process with you, because they feel understood and they feel supported. So by incorporating these components into our interactions, we are creating a more supportive and effective tutoring environment, and that helps us to build that student engagement, which can hopefully lead to deeper connection and richer understanding. Now let's discuss why developing questioning techniques is key to effective tutoring. Teaching and tutoring are closely related. We've talked about this before, and questioning is one of the most frequently used techniques in both contexts. When used skillfully, questioning can be incredibly effective in enhancing learning outcomes. Okay, how? Well, number one, it stimulates thinking. Well-crafted questions encourage students to think critically and explore concepts more deeply. For instance, instead of asking a yes-no question, try asking open-ended questions like, what do you think are the implications of this? This approach pushes students to articulate their reasoning and consider multiple perspectives. Second, questioning assesses student progress. Questioning serves as a valuable tool for gauging a student's understanding. By asking targeted questions, you can identify areas where they might be struggling. For example, asking, "Can you explain how you arrived at that conclusion?" allows you to assess the student's understanding of the material and then adjust your tutoring approach accordingly. If you find that there is actually some struggle there, you can back it up and, reassess where you're at in the process and where you're going to be able to get to by the end of the session. Third, questioning motivates students to stay in the game with you, right? And to pay attention. Engaging students with questions keeps them involved in the learning process. It's that engagement. When they know that they are going to be responsible for half of this dialogue, they're more likely to stay focused and attentive. You can also pose questions that relate to their interests or their experiences to fully capture their attention. I think one of the simplest things to do is start these sessions with just asking them what they liked about the assignment or what was most interesting to them about the assignment, right? Get them invested. 4, questioning provides repetition. Repeated questions reinforces learning. When you revisit key concepts with questions, you're solidifying the student's understanding. You can ask, "How does this concept relate to your thesis?" multiple times as you're looking at a paper, and they start to understand the importance of connecting each subpoint to their main point, just as an example. And then finally, we have emphasizing key points. Questions can highlight important themes or concepts in whatever material you're working with during a session. So by asking questions that draw attention to the key points, you help students recognize what is most significant. This is also super helpful when you're working with DLAs and ILAs. So by developing effective questioning techniques, we are enhancing the sessions and we're fostering deeper understanding for the students while also capturing some of that much desired engagement in the student, which makes the session more enjoyable for all parties involved. Now we're going to talk about the importance of critical thinking questions in your tutoring sessions. I think the most important thing is this idea that sometimes students are going to need a little bit of help figuring out how to go deeper when it comes to their thinking about their assignments and how to respond to their prompts, right? So your job is to prompt them with questions that encourage that deeper exploration. You can ask questions like, "What assumptions are you making about this topic?" Or "How are you responding to this part of the prompt?" And get them recognizing their thought patterns while also challenging them to think more critically about their ideas and how they are expressing those ideas. This also is a great thing because it helps them develop a more fruitful thinking process. So this is that idea that they'll be able to take these tools that you're giving them and apply them in their future work when they're not sitting there right next to you, right? So you're giving them tools and frameworks that are necessary for critical analysis. So you can ask questions like, "What evidence are you using to support this claim?" right? To direct their focus towards this idea that in order to construct a well-supported argument, for example, we need evidence, right? You can also ask those all-important why and how questions that help them to understand that relationship between the audience and the reader. And then there's this last part, right? We aren't telling students what to think, but rather we're demonstrating those ways of how. This is so, so, so important. We're asking them we're teaching them to ask their own questions, to evaluate their sources, to make connections between concepts. And by modeling this process, you are helping students become more critical, independent thinkers. So that is really one of the most important jobs of being a tutor, right? Because by empowering critical thinking questions into our tutoring sessions, we are empowering students to take ownership of their learning and develop the skills necessary for deeper understanding of the things that they are learning about. And then, therefore, their world, right? So cool. Your job is so cool. This slide has some examples of critical thinking questions that you can use during your sessions. but these are pulled directly from a list I created that's available to you on Canvas. What I suggest to you all is that you keep that list handy until you are more practiced at the art of asking these types of questions. So I have a couple of my favorites up here on this slide, right? But on the handout on Canvas, you can see they're sorted sort of by topic area, so you can look at critical thinking questions that will help you when a student is working on their thesis or when a student needs to work on their organization, et cetera, right? So take a look at that resource, or take another look at that resource, as I'm sure you've all seen it before. Let's explore the concept of probing questions and their significance in our tutoring practice. So probing questions are designed to follow up on a student's contribution. So this is to encourage deeper thinking and exploration of their ideas. So they serve several important functions. They're a follow-up on responses. So they come into play after an initial question from you and a response from the student that may not have fully explored the topic or fully answered your question. So if a student gives you a very surface level response, you can ask, can you tell me a little more? Or can you tell me why you feel that way? Or can you tell me how that connects? This prompts them to think critically and expand on that initial thought. They also work to extend knowledge. So they encourage students to extend and apply their understanding in new contexts. For example, if a student explains a particular point in the paper, you might ask, how could you apply this to the next paragraph, right? This pushes them to connect one idea to the next, which can help foster deeper engagement. And then my second little color block here just talks about the different types of probing questions. So we've got prompting questions, which are open-ended inquiries that encourage further elaboration. So you can ask, what led you to that conclusion? Then there are clarification-seeking questions. So when a response is unclear, you just ask for clarity with a question like, could you explain that part with a little more detail? Or there's seeking awareness questions. So these questions help students become a little more aware of their thought processes. So you can ask, what assumptions are being made when you make this claim? And then there's refocusing questions. So these are for when things maybe have strayed off course a little bit, and they serve to help you bring the focus back. So you might say, let's go back to that main point we were talking about. What was your idea about blank again, right? So bringing them back into the main event, right? When you've kind of gone off on a side road. So effectively utilizing these different probing questions are really about being that conduit for thought, like being that guide during the session. So here we're just looking at some examples of probing questions. So prompting questions typically follow those I don't know responses. Their purpose is to keep the student engaged and build on previous ideas, previous answers, previous sort of epiphanies that the student has had during the session. Then there's clarification questions. So those are about seeking more information, and they are critical when you need to clear up any kind of miscommunication between you and the student. They're also there to help you understand how much the student is understanding. And then we've got awareness questions. So awareness questions ask for justification of a response, and they require the student to think more deeply about their assertions. So awareness questions are about helping the student to sort of be aware of their own sort of assertions that they're making, right? Or making them sort of, it's about self-monitoring, helping them to sort of see what might be missing, right? So you're prompting them to provide justification, right? For example, for a claim. So you're showing them that they're missing evidence. And then there's refocusing questions, which help to move the discussion forward after the student has provided a solid response. So, you're giving them a solid high five kind of a thing, a great, and how does this idea tie into your thesis, right? So you're reinforcing their knowledge, that you're helping them make connections, and you're helping kind of keep the conversation moving ever forward. So integrating these types of probing questions into the tutoring session means significantly enhancing the engagement, the critical thinking, and the understanding of the material, which is like the amazing trifecta of awesome tutoring. Here, we're going to discuss the concept of reader response and its significance in the tutoring process. So, a reading response is, at its core, a reaction to what you're reading. It involves actively engaging with the text rather than passively consuming it. So by crafting a response as a reader, you're reflecting on the material and you're providing valuable feedback to the writer about sort of what you're getting from their words. So you can record and kind of share your reactions as you read. This practice will help the writer to understand whether their intended meaning is coming across effectively. For example, if a certain section resonates with you or confuses you, you're going to note that, and that's going to guide the writer in refining their work. You want to make notes as you read, right? So as you're looking at their work, consider jotting down your thoughts, your reactions, your reflections really quickly on what you're encountering. This process can encourage you to engage more deeply with the student's text and also serves as a useful reference for discussion later when you're talking to the student. You can write things that are really strong. I connect with this point and explain why, or parts that seem unclear. I'm not sure what you mean by. And then asking questions. There they are again. It's essential to ask questions as they arise naturally in your mind. So this practice clarifies your understanding, signals to the writer where additional information or modifications would increase clarity. For instance, you might ask what evidence supports this claim, or could this concept be explained further? So incorporating reader response techniques into tutoring sessions promotes engagement with the text with you too. It keeps you kind of focused on their ideas instead of just sometimes falling into that habit of wanting to edit sentences or fixate on grammar issues, right? You're giving it a deeper look, a more holistic look, which is going to help the students ultimately develop stronger writing and analytical skills. Next, we're going to look a little bit at the strategy of sharing and how it can enhance the sessions. So as you gain a clear understanding of other person's perspective through active listening, you can then introduce your own ideas, feelings, and suggestions, right? So you're only ready to share when you've done all the other stuff we've talked about. But this is your opportunity to create a collaborative dialogue where both you and the student get to learn from each other, exchange ideas, have this symbiotic relationship, right? So you can introduce your ideas. After actively listening to the student, you can share relevant experiences or insights. You might discuss a similar writing experience you've had or highlight what worked for you and how it might apply to their situation. This provides practical examples and it fosters a sense of connection. There's also this idea of triggering ideas. Sometimes sharing involves bringing up ideas that were sparked by something the student said during the conversation. For instance, if they mention a particular challenge they're facing, you could talk about a technique that you found helpful in a similar situation. So this approach helps to reinforce the student's learning, but it also provides them with new strategies. And again, it's that shared exchange. You're being a little vulnerable, and that opens up that space for them to connect with you. Now, we of course want to caution you with sharing, right? It's important to be careful. Remember that you're not co-authoring the student's work. The goal is to provide guidance and suggestion rather than to dictate what they should do. So always frame your contributions as possibilities, not absolutes. For example, you can say one approach you might consider is blank, which encourages the student to explore their options rather than feeling pressured to adopt your ideas. And then utilize your resources. You work in a writing center. There are resources everywhere, right? And this is a prime opportunity to utilize resources that can support the student's learning. You want to share handouts. You can also share websites you find useful. You can share any of our digital learning aids like the DLAs to enhance their learning. You can tell them about our awesome workshops. By pointing them to these resources, you're empowering them to take ownership of their learning and discover new tools for success. So incorporating this idea of and the strategy of sharing creates interactivity, enriches the experience, and develops this relationship between you and the student that encourages a more meaningful connection to the learning as well. And that's everything, everyone. So now I just want to thank you for joining me in this conversation about being flexible in our tutoring sessions and flexible in our practices. And I just want to remind you that there is a corresponding activity that goes with this video. So go ahead and complete that next. Thanks, everyone.